As I mentioned in an earlier video, I do believe we're coming up on canceling season at DC Comics. The next series to bite the dust is Suicide Squad. Obviously, it's been a big high-profile project because of the inclusion of Peacemaker. We had the movie, we've had the TV show. I do believe that has a part to play in the reason it's been canceled, so I'm going to go into the details. And I think I have the 6 real reasons why this comic book has been canceled after 15 issues. But here are the details first. DC are canceling their ongoing Suicide Squad comic book series. May 3rd, Suicide Squad number 15 will be its last issue. The news comes a day after writer Tim Sheridan announced the Teen Titans Academy ongoing series was also ending in May with its 15th issue. The series, which has featured a Peacemaker-led Suicide Squad under the supervision of Amanda Waller, will apparently wrap things up with the team trying to escape from under her badass thumb one last time. What's interesting about Suicide Squad being canceled, as opposed to Teen Titans Academy, which I think was an abomination, Suicide's pretty good. For the most part, people who like Suicide Squad like this comic book, and people that like Peacemaker have an enjoyment with it as well. So I do think there are some other contributing factors in this, but by all means, from what I've been told and in the feedback that I've gotten, the comic book is good. I will say this, just based on the interactions that I've had on the channel, there wasn't a ton of interest in Suicide Squad. The people that liked it really liked it, but there weren't a whole lot of people talking about it, and I don't think there was a lot of word of mouth. There's a reason for that too, and I'm going to get to that here in a few minutes, but we do have some more details on the cancellation. The final issue will feature this volume's original series artist Eduardo Pansica, with assists from Julio Ferreira and Dexter Soy. Dennis Hopeless, who began co-writing the title for the upcoming War on Earth 3 crossover issues in March's Suicide Squad number 13, alongside the series' original writer Robbie Thompson, is writing the final 2 issues himself. While the Suicide Squad ongoing series may be ending for now, DC actually has another Suicide Squad-esque series concurrently ongoing called Task Force Z. The publisher has also had a string of Suicide Squad limited series through its adult-oriented Black Label imprint. Me personally, I hate to see a comic book like this go early. Only 15 issues on an ongoing series is a very abbreviated run. This is Marvel-esque, behavior on the part of DC Comics. We're definitely seeing some large-scale changes in the publisher's behavior. I'm going to talk about that more in depth when I talk about the DC solicitations in full on Monday. I'm going to have about a 30-minute video going over some of the numbers and then the comic books that they have. But there aren't enough good DC comics being published right now to actually see one that has some quality that is an alternative to all the Batman out there is really a big disappointment in my mind. And the fact that, there are Suicide Squad fans out there, not the biggest property in the world. It's not Justice League. This isn't like dropping the ball with Teen Titans Academy, where you have what was one of the biggest properties in all of comic books at one time. Suicide Squad is a cool premise, and they're always going to be Suicide Squad fans. The problem is they've been let down a lot lately. Now let's get into the 6 major reasons why I think this comic book has been canceled prematurely at only 15 issues. Obviously, first and foremost, the movie The Suicide Squad has been long since gone. Obviously, this was started in conjunction kind of with that, and now the Peacemaker TV show on HBO Max is over. There's no real reason to have the Suicide Squad led by Peacemaker, which was a new addition based on the movie and the TV show starring John Cena that he was included. So there's not a real reason to have that sort of synergy between what's going on at HBO Max and in Warner Brothers and in the comic books if they're not going to continue on. I don't know that there's going to be a Suicide Squad movie sequel, and I don't know that we're going to get season 2 of Peacemaker. But without that, there was no real reason to continue this specific iteration of Suicide Squad because it was so Peacemaker-centric. And without the TV show really having some long-term plans that DC Comics could really feed into, there's probably no reason to continue on with this particular version of the team. The other big reason that I think that this is happening is because we do have Dark Crisis coming to DC Comics. Now, I know Joshua Williamson, and I imagine he's trying to be as forthcoming and honest as possible, has said this isn't a reboot, this isn't a relaunch. There are going to be plenty of changes to the DC Comics series lineups. There just has to be, rolling out of these big changes and events that are happening at DC Dark Crisis. So I do think with this DC Crisis coming, that we are entering cancellation season for DC. We're going to see a lot of titles wind up their runs. I think we're going to see a lot of reboots back to number 1. I'll be shocked if we don't get a Batman number 1 out of this. And we're going to see a lot of these, more fringe titles being canceled and put away with. And they're going to try and revitalize the line with new ideas. They need to do this so badly. They can't sell anything right now. other than Batman comics. And that's a major problem at DC Comics, and they do need to use Dark Crisis as a springboard to get some type of enthusiasm and revamp their comic book line. And I do think that's one of the major reasons Suicide Squad is being canceled after only 15 issues. The third reason I think this is happening is that Suicide Squad and Peacemaker both have been severely overexposed due to the television shows and the movie that came out. We've had so many Suicide Squad miniseries that are still going on. We had a Peacemaker miniseries that's coming up, and a lot of them have pretty high-profile creators on them, you know, being Brian Azzarello, Garth Ennis, and the like. And quite frankly, Peacemaker and Suicide Squad aren't like A-list characters, not even B-list characters. These are kind of bottom row kind of properties that definitely have a fan base, and they definitely have eyes on them and interest, but definitely not enough to carry the amount of titles that we have. We still have Suicide Squad Get Joker. We've got Peacemaker Disturbing the Peace. We've got Suicide Squad The Blaze. We have a ton of Suicide Squad and Peacemaker going on in DC Comics, completely overexposed. And what makes this series special, if you can go to 4 other places and find these characters and these teams doing adventures, and quite frankly, written by really high-profile creators, which Suicide Squad wasn't. That was probably the 4th reason into this. I personally think Robbie Thompson's a pretty darn good comic book writer, but he doesn't have a lot of fanfare. There's not a lot of eyes on him just specifically as a comic book creator. Eduardo Pansica, I think, is a fantastic artist, and I think he's one of those up-and-coming artists at DC Comics that really needs to be put on one of their big titles and get exposed to the masses, because I think he can be a really big name in comic books. But right now, Robbie Thompson and Eduardo Pansica just don't really have a lot of name cachet. And we know Dennis Hopeless Hallam is taking over for Robbie Thompson. Dennis Hopeless Hallam is a terrible comic book writer. People know who he is, but it's for all the wrong reasons. So it's not like they had really backed this series up with an A-list talent or even a B-list talent. These were kind of no-name comic book creators, talented at that, but they didn't really bring a lot of fans to the table with them. Another big thing going against this iteration of Suicide Squad was the lack of big-name characters on the title. Really, Peacemaker was being asked to carry this title by himself, which is a bit surprising. The character really hadn't been spotlighted in a very long time until the Suicide Squad movie, and then we got the John Cena Peacemaker series. So people were aware of the character, but it's not like the comic book fans themselves, for the most part, are really invested in Peacemaker. So to ask Peacemaker to kind of carry the Suicide Squad, which has really been associated heavily with Harley Quinn, that's another character that's overexposed for other reasons, was a big ask just for that character. And not surprisingly, didn't result in big sales likely. There just wasn't that character that was going to bring people in off the streets, you know, the normie comic readers, and say, you have to read this comic book because you're going to see Peacemaker. You could have seen him elsewhere. And quite frankly, he's not a huge name in comic books. The final reason that I believe Suicide Squad ended up getting canceled so early, and those are the major ones, but if you're a Suicide Squad fan, prior to this, there was a bigger name writer on the book, Tom Taylor. That thing just got abruptly canceled at issue number 11. If you're a Suicide Squad fan and they keep relaunching the book and seemingly canceling it out of nowhere for no particular reason, it's going to be hard for you to go to DC Comics and trust them and invest in another Suicide Squad team or a comic book, because they're consistently canceling the damn thing over and over. You know, issue number 11 last time, issue number 15 this time. And prior to this, like I said, it was Tom Taylor. Obviously, I think that had a lot to do because we had Infinite Frontier coming up, but we also had the Suicide Squad movie, which Peacemaker was not in his run. And I think they needed a change of direction. I think Tom Taylor knew he was going to be taking over Nightwing. But for a Suicide Squad fan and a reader and somebody that had invested in that book, and there were fans of that book, even if the sales weren't completely high, that one was also held in pretty high esteem. You know, you can only be jerked around so often from DC Comics before you lose faith that the fact that when they announce a title that you like, in something that you've been invested in maybe your entire life, that they aren't going to screw it up or pull the rug out from underneath you. You know, there's only so many times that you can go up and pick up that number one until you realize this thing's only going to last 15 issues. So I do think there's a confidence or lacking of confidence between DC Comics and their customers right now. And I don't blame them, because they've been doing this with a lot of titles. So I think there are a lot of reasons that went into the Suicide Squad being canceled so early. I don't think really quality was one of them. I think the artist is fantastic. I think the writer's pretty darn good, but I just think there were so many things working against it. The movie's over. Now the television show's over. We got this crisis event coming up. We didn't really put big name creators on it. Peacemaker is a character that certainly Warner Brothers and DC were trying to push, but not traditionally a big seller in comic books. And you can only continuously cancel people's comic books prematurely before they kind of realize maybe it's not the time to jump in. This is a loss for DC Comics fans. This was an alternative, a quality alternative to Batman. Hopefully we get more than just Batman coming out of Dark Crisis. But I do imagine we're going to get some more important titles canceled over the next 2 or 3 months at DC Comics as we lead into this event and they get ready for whatever it is that's going to come out of it to really try and revamp the line at DC. DC Comics were only canceling comic books this week. They actually announced a new Batman series called Batman the Fortress. I got the details right here. And definitely one of the big issues at DC Comics that's killing their sales right now is their over-reliance on Batman. If you're unaware of that, you got to check this video out and see what's happening over at DC.